In an interview this weekend with NPR, Bishop Hirschfield explained what he meant by that very dramatic pronouncement. He said, quote, "What I said to the clergy was, I'm just asking you to live your life without fear of death. Be prepared. I'm not asking you to go look for that bullet. I'm simply saying be ready. Have your affairs in order. Have your soul ready in case you find yourself in trouble." The bishop said, quote, "Not everyone can be a Jonathan Daniels, but we're increasingly called to go into places that feel dangerous." Well, that Episcopal bishop in New Hampshire was doing that interview with NPR yesterday. At the same time, Catholic Archbishop Timothy Broglio was doing an interview with the BBC. Now, Archbishop Broglio is the archbishop who serves the U.S. Armed Forces for the Catholic Church. And Archbishop Broglio was asked in this BBC interview yesterday about the prospect that President Donald Trump may order the U.S. military to invade Greenland, to try to seize Greenland for the United States. Archbishop Broglio told the BBC, quote, "It would be very difficult for a soldier or Marine or a sailor by himself to disobey an order such as that. But strictly speaking, he or she would be within the realm of their own conscience. It would be morally acceptable to disobey that order." So yesterday, in one day, we have the Episcopal bishop in New Hampshire explaining that his clergy need to have their wills written and their affairs in order because they may be called to stand up against tyranny in the United States right now to the point of dangerousness, to the point where their lives may be at risk, to the point where he is talking about martyrdom in his church. The same day, the Catholic Archbishop for the U.S. Armed Services says it would be morally acceptable for U.S. service members to refuse orders from this president to invade a country that he is currently threatening. All in one day. Then today, the very next day, the three highest-ranking Catholic clerics in the United States, cardinals who oversee Washington, D.C., and Chicago and Newark, all released a joint statement lambasting the foreign policy adventurism of the U.S. government right now, saying it calls into question the, quote, moral role of our country. And, you know, that's a lot all at once. I mean, whether or not you're a religious person, even if you are a religious person, whether or not these developments are from your faith tradition, I think it's safe to say there's something going on when big, mainline, mainstream religious leaders of very, very large, very influential religious denominations in the United States start talking in terms this stark. Start literally talking about martyrdom. Start trying to bring their moral force to bear against the behavior and actions of a U.S. president and the U.S. government that he commands. Exactly 1 year ago today, it was the eve of Donald Trump's inauguration for a second term as president. And the Catholic Archbishop of Chicago, 1 year ago today, delivered this message to the country.
Well, I wish the new administration success in promoting the common good. The reports being circulated of planned mass deportations targeting the Chicago area are not only profoundly disturbing, but also wound us deeply. For members of faith communities, the threatened mass deportation also leaves us with the searing question: what is God telling us in this moment? People of
After me, make sure you don't miss my friend, Mr. Jack Reacher's insights.
Breaking news. Something extraordinary is happening in America right now. Something that has not happened since the Civil Rights era. The leaders of the largest Christian denominations in the United States are openly calling on their followers to resist the government, to prepare for martyrdom, to disobey orders, and to stand against what they are calling tyranny. I want you to understand the gravity of what I am about to tell you. In the span of just 48 hours, an Episcopal bishop told his clergy to write their wills and prepare to die. A Catholic archbishop told American soldiers it is morally acceptable to disobey the president's orders. And three of the most powerful cardinals in the United States released a statement condemning American foreign policy as immoral. This is not normal. This is not politics. This is the moral leadership of this country sounding the alarm that we are in a crisis. In this video, I am going to answer 3 questions that will change how you see what is happening in America. First, why are religious leaders suddenly talking about martyrdom and resistance? Second, what exactly did the Archbishop tell American troops about refusing orders? Third, what does this mean for you and your family? Let me start with what happened on January 9th. Bishop Rob Hirschfeld of the Episcopal Church of New Hampshire stood at a vigil for Renee Good, the 37-year-old mother who was shot and killed by an ICE agent in Minneapolis. And he said something that sent shockwaves through the religious community. Quote, "I have told the clergy of the Episcopal Diocese of New Hampshire that we may be entering into a new era of martyrdom. And I have asked them to get their affairs in order, to make sure they have their wills written, because it may be that now is no longer the time for statements, but for us with our bodies to stand between the powers of this world and the most vulnerable." Let that sink in. A bishop in the United States of America is telling his priests to prepare to die, to write their wills, to get their affairs in order, because standing up for their faith may cost them their lives. Hirschfeld did not call for violence. He was clear about that, but he said something that should shake every American to their core. Quote, "Those of us who are ready to build a new world, we also have to be prepared. If we truly want to live without fear, we cannot fear even death itself, my friends." The White House responded. Spokesperson Abigail Jackson said, quote, "No one should follow advice encouraging them to commit crimes. Anyone who interferes with federal law enforcement operations is committing a crime and will be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law." Think about what just happened. A bishop said be ready to die protecting the vulnerable. The White House said we will prosecute you. That is where we are. If you understand the significance of this moment, smash that like button right now. Share this video, because this is not being covered the way it should be. Now let me tell you what happened on the same day. January 18th, Archbishop Timothy Broglio, the head of the Catholic Archdiocese for the United States Military Services, gave an interview to the BBC. And what he said is unprecedented. Broglio was asked about President Trump's threats to invade Greenland, to use military force to seize territory from Denmark, a NATO ally. And the Archbishop said this, quote, "It would be very difficult for a soldier or a Marine or a sailor by himself to disobey an order such as that, but that strictly speaking he or she would be within the realm of their own conscience. It would be morally acceptable to disobey that order." Let me repeat that. The Catholic Archbishop responsible for the spiritual welfare of every Catholic service member in the United States military just told them it is morally acceptable to refuse the president's orders. Broglio went further. He said, quote, "I cannot see any circumstances where taking Greenland by force would fulfill the criteria of a just war. Greenland is a territory of Denmark. Denmark is an ally. It is part of NATO. It does not seem really reasonable that the United States would attack and occupy a friendly nation. It does not seem acceptable." He said the prospect of military action in Greenland, quote, "tarnishes the image of the United States in our world, because traditionally we have responded to situations of oppression. This is certainly very difficult to justify. This is not a liberal activist. This is not a Democratic politician. This is a conservative archbishop who has served the military community since 2007, a former president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. And he is telling American troops they can refuse the commander-in-chief. Write conscience in the comments right now. I want to see how many people understand what is happening. But it does not stop there. The very next day, January 19th, the 3 highest-ranking Catholic cardinals in the United States released a joint statement that reads like a moral indictment of American foreign policy. Cardinal Blase Cupich of Chicago, Cardinal Robert McElroy of Washington, D.C., Cardinal Joseph Tobin of Newark. These are not minor figures. These are the most powerful Catholic leaders in America. And they said this country has, quote, "entered into the most profound and searing debate about the moral foundation for America's actions in the world since the end of the Cold War." Their statement was titled "Charting a Moral Vision of American Foreign Policy," and it pulled no punches. Quote, "The events in Venezuela, Ukraine, and Greenland have raised basic questions about the use of military force and the meaning of peace. The sovereign rights of nations to self-determination appear all too fragile in a world of ever greater conflagrations." They continued, quote, "We renounce war as an instrument for narrow national interests and proclaim that military action must be seen only as a last resort in extreme situations, not a normal instrument of national policy. Cardinal McElroy told the Associated Press, quote, "Most of the United States and the world are adrift morally in terms of foreign policy. I still believe the United States has a tremendous impact upon the world." Cardinal Cupic explained why they felt compelled to speak. He said, quote, "We were at the consistory with all the other cardinals of the world, and we heard voices of great alarm about what was happening in the United States, particularly the breakdown of the consensus that we have had in the world since World War II about the way that we handle conflicts. The easy turn to war and violence and military action, the sovereignty of nations, and the dialogue that must go on with allies in order to solve difficulties. We saw that alarm in the voices and in the expressions of the cardinals from around the world." Think about that. Cardinals from around the world are alarmed at what America is doing, and American cardinals felt they had to come home and warn their own people. Now let me put this in context. This is not the first time the Catholic Church has spoken out against the Trump administration. In November 2025, the entire U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, all 200 plus of them, condemned the administration's mass deportation policy and what they called the vilification of immigrants in public discourse. Cardinal Cupic has been at the center of this resistance. 1 year ago on Inauguration Day, he warned, quote, "If the indiscriminate mass deportations being reported were to be carried out, this would be an affront to the dignity of all people and communities and deny the legacy of what it means to be an American." 8 months later, Trump launched Operation Midway Blitz in Chicago, sending massive numbers of federal agents to hunt immigrants in the streets. Cardinal Cupic responded, quote, "Families are being torn apart, children are left in fear, and communities are shaken by immigration raids and detentions. These actions wound the soul of our city." Let me be clear, the Church stands with migrants. And now in January 2026, Cupic and his fellow cardinals are expanding their critique beyond immigration to foreign policy itself, to Venezuela, to Greenland, to the very nature of American power. Cardinal Tobin of Newark described what he called the moral compass the cardinals wish the U.S. would use globally. Quote, "It cannot be that my prosperity is predicated on inhuman treatment of others. The real argument is not just my right or individual rights, but what is the common good." Here is why this matters to you personally, whether you are Catholic or not, whether you are religious or not. When the moral leaders of major institutions start using words like martyrdom and conscience and tyranny, it means something has fundamentally shifted in this country. The Episcopal Church has 1.6 million members. The Catholic Church has 70 million members in the United States. That is nearly a quarter of the American population. When their leaders speak, it carries weight. And right now, their leaders are saying we are in a moral crisis. Bishop Sean Rowe, the presiding bishop of the entire Episcopal Church, said this week, quote, "We keep resisting, advocating, bearing witness, and repairing the breach. We keep sheltering and caring for those among us who are immigrants and refugees because they are beloved by God. And without them, we cannot fully be the Church." In Minnesota, Bishop Craig Loya urged people not to meet hatred with hatred. Quote, "We are going to make like our ancient ancestors and turn the world upside down by mobilizing for love. We are going to disrupt with Jesus' hope. We are going to agitate with Jesus' love." These are not radical statements in isolation. But in the context of ICE agents shooting American citizens, the president threatening to invade allied nations, and the government threatening to deploy the military against American protesters, these words take on a different meaning entirely. Pope Leo XIV himself, the first American pope in history, has been issuing warnings from the Vatican. In a January 9th address to diplomats, he denounced how nations were using force to assert their dominion worldwide, quote, "completely undermining peace and the post-World War II international legal order." The Vatican's Secretary of State Cardinal Pietro Parolin said, quote, "Solutions by force cannot be employed," and warned that reliance on force, quote, "will always lead closer to a conflict." Now here is the question that hangs over all of this. What happens next? But here's what keeps me up at night. What happens when the federal government decides these religious leaders are not just critics, but threats? What happens when a bishop who tells his flock to shelter immigrants gets arrested? What happens when a cardinal who condemns military aggression gets labeled an enemy of the state? We have seen this before in history. We have seen governments turn against their own moral institutions. We have seen faith leaders imprisoned, silenced. Worse, the question is not whether America is capable of this. The question is whether we are already on that path. and whether we will recognize it before it is too late. Archbishop Broglio was asked if he believes he can make a real difference by laying down these moral red lines. He acknowledged it is unknown whether the powers that be will listen to those admonitions. But he said, quote, "I think it is my duty to speak appropriately as I am able." Bishop Hirschfeld cited historical clergy who risked their lives to protect others. He mentioned Jonathan Daniels, a seminary student from New Hampshire who was shot and killed by a sheriff's deputy in Alabama in 1965 while protecting a civil rights activist. Hirschfeld is saying we may be entering that same era of witness. Under U.S. military law, troops are required to disobey orders that are manifestly or patently unlawful. But as legal expert Brenner Fissel from Villanova noted, such cases are legally complex. The system is legal, not theological. But Broglio is adding a moral dimension. He is telling Catholic service members that even if they cannot legally refuse, they can morally refuse, and that their souls matter more than their careers. Broglio also spoke about the drug boat strikes that have killed at least 115 people since September. He issued a statement in December saying, quote, "In the fight against drugs, the end never justifies the means. No one can ever be ordered to commit an immoral act, and even those suspected of committing a crime are entitled to due process under the law." He said, quote, "As the moral principle forbidding the intentional killing of noncombatants is inviolable, it would be an illegal and immoral order to kill deliberately survivors on a vessel who pose no immediate lethal threat to our armed forces." So here's where we stand. A bishop is telling his clergy to prepare for martyrdom. An archbishop is telling soldiers they can refuse orders. 3 cardinals are condemning American foreign policy as immoral. The Pope is warning about the collapse of international order, and the government is responding with threats of prosecution. This is not normal political disagreement. This is institutional moral resistance, the kind we have not seen in this country since the Vietnam War, since the Civil Rights Movement, since moments in history that we now recognize as turning points. I am not telling you what to believe. I am not telling you what to do. I am telling you that when the shepherds start warning the flock that wolves are at the door, you should pay attention. If you believe this story matters, subscribe to this channel right now. Like this video. Share it with everyone you know, because the mainstream media is not covering this the way it deserves. The question is not whether the church will resist. The church is already resisting. The question is whether anyone in power is listening, and whether the rest of us have the courage to stand with them. The cardinals wrote, quote, "We cannot stand by while decisions are made that condemn millions to lives trapped permanently at the edge of existence. Pope Leo has given us clear direction, and we must apply his teachings to the conduct of our nation and its leaders." Cardinal Tobin warned, quote, "Recent events, including participation in last week's consistory in Rome with Pope Leo and brother cardinals from across the world, convince me of the need to underscore the vision of Pope Leo for just and peaceful relations among nations. Otherwise, escalating threats and armed conflict risk destroying international relations and plunging the world into incalculable suffering." That is where we are. Religious leaders talking about incalculable suffering, about martyrdom, about the moral collapse of American foreign policy, about soldiers refusing orders. The statement from the 3 cardinals came out on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Cardinal Cupic said that was, quote, "a wonderful coincidence to honor a man who stood for human dignity." King himself was a religious leader who called Americans to moral resistance, who stood against unjust laws, who paid the ultimate price for his witness. And now a new generation of religious leaders is picking up that mantle, not with violence, but with moral clarity, with the willingness to speak truth to power, and with the courage to prepare their followers for whatever comes next. This is January 2026, and the church is sounding the alarm.